Welcome, my name is Sarah, and this webinar is brought to you by Piedmont Housing Alliance and produced by the Housing Counseling team. So tonight we are going to talk about fair housing rights and finding a rental in the Charlottesville area. So we're going to be talking about what housing providers, so like property management and landlords, what they're looking for in a rental application, resources on finding a rental, talking to landlords, tips on what you're going to do when you are looking at houses and rental units, and then the fair housing laws. So one of the things that landlords really want to focus on are objective standards. So looking at your income, your credit history, things that are measurable with every single person. And so the thing that we want landlords and property managers to keep in mind is if they use a certain standard for looking at applicants, they should apply it to every single person. They can't just say, oh, I'm going to look at your income, your credit history, your background check, but I'm also going to look at your driving history. If they look at your driving history, for example, they have to look at everyone's history, driving history. Otherwise, it would be discrimination. So every landlord should have the same process for choosing applicants across the board and no changes or exceptions for anyone regardless of any other detail. Okay. So the things that landlords are going to be looking at is, whether you can pay your rent on time. So they're going to look at your income and your credit history for that. So with income, some property management companies or landlords may require that if your rent is $500, that you have to have double that in your gross income. So if you have a $500 rent, then it's $1,000 worth of income every month. And the same goes for, like if you had a $700 rent, that would be $1,400. Sometimes property management companies have been known to require 3 times the rent for your monthly gross income. So if you don't have the amount in income that they're looking for, then they could deny your application for that. On the flip side, they may have income limits. So if your income is over a certain amount of money, they could also deny you the your application for that particular rental because you're over the income limits. The other thing that comes up a lot is credit history. So there are some property management companies that they use a computer system, and the computer system says that this applicant has, all applicants have to have a 620 credit score or a 570 minimum credit score. Whatever that number is, if you don't meet that credit score criteria, then they can deny your application. On the other hand, we've had we know of property managers and landlords who look at the contents of a credit report rather than looking at the score. And as long as people don't have judgments from previous landlords showing up on their credit report, a lot of times the landlords or property management companies will accept you based on that credit history, even though your credit score may be lower than what they're looking for. Now, I will say this, because of the recent changes in the laws for the Affordable Care Act, a lot of the local hospitals have been pretty aggressive in doing garnishments of wages if there are medical collections. So if you have some medical collections, but they end up being turned into a judgment, and then that could eventually lead to a garnishment. So the property management people are looking more closely at medical judgments than they were in the past, just because, the state of Virginia, just the way that we've had it set up. Anyway, so landlords should be focusing on income, credit. They're also going to want to know whether you have been taking good care of other people's property and that you respect the rights of others. So that's going to be a landlord reference. A lot of times on applications, you'll just write in who your previous landlord had been in the past, and then they'll contact them. If you have a landlord reference letter, for example, you can also submit that with your application, and that's probably one of the best things that you can do. Not everybody has to have a landlord reference letter in hand. A lot of times people will just put down the name and the number to reach their previous landlord to get some, a reference for that. Okay. So, some reasons that landlords and property management companies can deny your application. So you can legitimately be denied due to credit history, like we talked about, income restrictions, your record of behavior that would violate the lease, and we're going to talk about that next. Recent evidence that renters direct threat to health and safety of others, and then illegal use of drugs. So any of those things that they catch on the application, they can deny you for. And a lot of this is property management companies and the larger organizations. Private landlords, this may not apply, like some of this may not be applicable to them. Private landlords can, they're not allowed to discriminate based on fair housing laws, but usually they're going to be a little less strict in their housing criteria, their criteria for selecting their next tenant, rather. Okay. So, if there was, if you were submitting application to Midway Manor or to Piedmont Housing Alliance, Greenstone on 5th, or other public housing units, then this is what HUD has to say about criminal background checks and any drug-related activities that might show up on the criminal background check or that the owner or property manager might know of. So these are what HUD says, that if you're applying to a place that uses HUD money, so HUD stands for Housing and Urban Development, and they lots of time gives money to property management companies to help them build or to provide affordable housing in the area. And so a lot of times you'll see this as the base criteria, as sort of the baseline that property managers use, and a lot of times they can go above and beyond that, apply even more rules. But this is the basic, this is the at least the minimum that property managers have to follow. So, for a household that has a member who was evicted in the last 3 years from federally assisted housing for drug-related criminal activity, so they will deny your application if anyone in the household, not you, it could be you, it could be the co-applicant, any member who's going to be living in that unit, if they've been evicted in the last 3 years from federally assisted housing for drug-related criminal activity, the application will be denied. Also, if any member of the household where the owner believes that a member of your household is currently using illegal drugs or the tenant is actually using illegal drugs, they can deny the application as well. Let's see, any household member who is registered on a state sex offender list or either in the state of Virginia or if they're registered as a state sex offender list for any state in the United States of America, then that would be an automatic no. Also, any household member whose behavior has interfered with the health and safety and right to peaceful enjoyment by other residents, so they'll also receive the automatic no. So this is the base of the most basic that a property management company has to follow. A private landlord may not follow these guidelines, but this is something that if you're applying, like I said, to Midway Manor, public housing, Friendship Court, Piedmont Housing Alliance, or Greenstone on 5th, this is the basic principles that they have to use. Now, a lot of those companies that I mentioned, they're going to have even more criteria above and beyond this basic level. Okay. So, for property management companies, they, like I said, they have additional guidelines, and you can find out what those are. So, there's something called a tenant selection plan or a resident selection plan, and it gives all the guidelines for qualifying for an application, and then they also list all the reasons that they could deny your application. And they are allowed to be stricter than HUD's basic guidelines. You can request a copy of the tenant selection plan even before you submit your application fee, and that's really what we want. We want you to know whether you can be denied or not before you give them that application fee, so you can request a copy of their tenant selection plan just to see if things, whether you may be eligible or not for that unit. And so, there was something else that I wanted to say. Some places may overlook some of the following misdemeanors and felonies, so like trespassing, charges for fraud, Medicare fraud, welfare fraud, check fraud, DUIs, driving misdemeanors, and some other felonies. But they will probably have automatic no's if they see on the criminal background check if there was any felony or misdemeanor in regards to violence. So violence against women, violence against children, animals, things like that. Any use of weapons, I've heard, is an automatic no. And then the distribution and production of drugs is a huge no. But I've heard that some property management companies have a gray area if someone has a misdemeanor or a felony in regards to use of drugs. So that's up to the property management company, that's their discretion, but they should have it stated in their tenant selection plan what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. Okay. So, and again, the purpose of this is application fees for property management companies range from $25 per adult to like $150 per adult, right? So we want you to avoid paying those high cost fees if some of these things might be an issue. And like I said, every property management company is going to have different rules above and beyond HUD's basic guidelines. So finding that out to see whether it's worth paying that $25 per adult who's going to be living in the unit is worth it or not. Okay. So where to find the housing? And like I said, with federally funded properties, it may work, it may not work, it just depends on your situation. You're definitely going to want to request that tenant selection plan so that you can figure out, okay, I meet their criteria or no, I don't, before you pay any kind of application fees. And there's an organization called Lending Hands. So this is an ex-offender resource agency, and they assist with successful transition back into society. They provide support and services with transportation assistance, housing information, job referrals, resume assistance, and child advocacy, and they are present in the Charlottesville area. They cover the city of Charlottesville, counties of Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, Fluvanna, and Nelson, I believe. And the other thing is private landlords. So Charlottesville in general is a really tough place to find affordable housing. I mean, it's just a lot of factors go into that, but it's just a really tough place to find decent affordable housing, and that's just the city of Charlottesville plus the surrounding counties. It's a real challenge. And so finding private landlords who might not be as expensive as other rental units or other property management places. So where can you find private landlords? What's the best place to go? So a lot of people will probably go to Craigslist or other online avenues. You have the newspaper, you have word of mouth, which is going to be friends or family, but then you also have The Haven. So The Haven is an organization dedicated to ending homelessness and offers a variety of services, and one of those is the Housing Navigator. and he has been reaching out to private landlords to see if they're willing to work with some of the Havens programs. So the housing navigator, if you give him a call, he will talk to you for about 5 minutes and then, do a little bit of chatting, but then he's willing to give people the private landlord list so that they can go and contact them and see if they have anything available and what their criteria is. So we will be giving a resource, or sending this over to Campbell, a resource list for Lending Hands and the Haven, and contact information so anyone can follow up. Okay. So we do want to talk about avoiding scams with using Craigslist, or really any advertising, right? Like internet scams, email scams. This is really applicable to all of those. So Craigslist, I love Craigslist. It's a really great place, but you want to be careful. You want to be cautious. Anybody can sign up and use it, and so there's a whole range of, people who are legit and then people who are just trying to make a quick buck and scam. So avoiding scams online, specifically looking at Craigslist. So these are some of the things you want to watch out for. If the landlord asks for payment, for a security deposit without a lease in place, that's a big red flag for us. And in general, we would say, if you're looking at a house, pictures online, and if you see a for sale sign in front of that house in any of the pictures, that's a big red flag. And really, any advertisements that say urgent, or you need to follow up immediately, or you need to hop on this deal quickly, is probably going to be a scam. Not always, but it's probably a good sign to just avoid some of those advertisements. You also want to watch out if the monthly payment for that rental unit is much cheaper in comparison to other homes in the area with a similar number of bedrooms and in a similar area. So for example, if there was a advertisement on Craigslist and it was, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bath, single family home in the Belmont area for $350 a month, that would be a big red flag, because renting in that part of the city might be more like $1,200, $1,300 a month for something similar to that. Okay, so if the landlord asks for fees or rent in cash only, that's also a sign you want to be paying them with check or money order or certified check, cashier's check, something where it's not cash. So basically, you want to, if you see an advertisement, everything looks good, you try to meet up with this person to view the house. If they don't have keys to get into the house, that's a big sign, that's a red flag. So you need access to the inside of that house before you sign on the dotted line or you pay any kind of money for this unit. Okay. So some more examples. So if you see any advertisements that say that the landlord is out of the country, but they'll mail you the keys in exchange for wired money, or if the landlord states they're not in the country or they're not currently in the state, but they're going to have a friend show you around the property, that's also a very common scam that we've seen on Craigslist and other places. And so basically someone has just noticed that a house is empty, maybe it has that for sale sign, and they don't have access to the inside of the house, but they take pictures. They might know the person who actually owns the house, but it's not there. Then they put the ad on Craigslist, and then they say, "Hey, I'm a friend of the landlord, and I'm going to show you around the property." We would say, just be very, very, very careful when you're looking at any online advertisements for housing. Okay. So, let's say that you've gotten through that hurdle, you've found 3 through either word of mouth, friends, family, you've found a rental unit and you're going to talk to the landlord. So, of course, you want to be honest and upfront with the landlord about your criminal background check, especially if they're going to be running that background check. If you are turned down, if that application is denied, don't stress. You never know if a couple months down the line or even a couple weeks later they give you a call and say, hey, I want to meet again and talk this out and accept the application, because you never know if they'll find someone to rent that unit out. Let's see. Some other tips for talking to a landlord. If the issue comes up, you want to explain what and how you made a mistake in the past. So there are lots of stereotypes surrounding ex-offenders and misdemeanors and felonies. So, you want to explain what was the mistake, how you made the mistake, and how it's in your past. So definitely want to make a good first impression. So ask questions about the property, pay attention to details, maintain eye contact with the landlord, dress nicely, and have a firm handshake. So I sort of picked up some of these tips at this website, so helpforfelons.org, and we'll also be putting this on the resource list. So when you're looking at rental housing, being neat and clean when you go, bring pen and paper so you can take notes, lots of notes, especially if you're viewing more than one unit on the same day. Bring your camera, bring a phone to take pictures. Again, for the same reason, you want to be able to be like, if you see 3 or 4 units in the same day or within 2 days, it's like they all blur together. So having pictures, having notes so that oh, this was this house and there was that issue with this other place, and so you can distinguish between all of them. Bring along a friend or a family member so you don't miss anything good or bad about the rental unit. They can point some things out because they aren't as emotionally attached to finding and getting the rental unit as you would be. So questions that you want to talk to the landlord after you view the property. How much is the monthly rent? Biggest question out there, right? And so other things, are the utilities going to be included in the monthly rent amount that you just gave me, or do I have to pay the utilities separate? How much is the security deposit? When do you want to have the security deposit paid? What are the conditions that you get the security deposit back at the end of your lease? You want to make sure that you know up front, oh, it has to be spick and span, or we have to do this, this, and this, and this, and then we'll get our security deposit. So how long is the lease? Is it going to be 6 months? Is it a 12-month lease? 18 months? Is this lease going to be month to month? Meaning that you can terminate the lease every 30 days, or the landlord could do that as well. So what are the lease terms? How long is it going to last? When do I have to give you notice when I'm going to renew the lease? Things like that. Also, another really big question, who pays for the maintenance of the unit? Who's going to be responsible for any repairs? If you're working with a property management company, a lot of times they take on that responsibility. But if you're working with a private landlord, they may split all of the repairs, or they may say, you know what, you're responsible for changing the light bulbs, you're responsible for maintaining the light fixtures, so if something happens, you have to replace it. But then they may take care of the larger things like plumbing repairs, toilets, the heat pump. But then again, it may be split the other way, so you want to make sure you know who's responsible and when you have to report that once you've noticed something going on. You also want to know if there are going to be any community rules that you have to be aware of, and what the policy is on guests. what noise level is acceptable and what the hours of that noise level can be. You know, what can you do for common areas and things like that. You also want to be aware of when is the rent due. Is it going to be the 1st, the 10th, the 15th, the 20th? When do they want you to send that check in? When is it considered late? How much are the late fees? Are there laundry facilities on site? Do you have to buy a washer and dryer, or is the washer and dryer included in the unit? Is that an option, maybe an upgrade for another unit? And then, does the unit come with a parking spot? What are the parking policies? Do you have to buy a sticker showing that you live at this apartment? All those good things. So in the state of Virginia, the landlord can charge no more than 2 months' rent for your security deposit. Okay? And like I said earlier, application fees can run anywhere from $25 to $150 per adult. Everybody has a different fee requirement, and it's for different things, and you definitely want to talk to them. Maybe the $150 for application is a lot of money. And so maybe that $150 covers 3 adults, up to 3 adults. But maybe another place might say it's $25 per adult, and if you have 3 adults who are applying for this one unit, then that's, $75 right there. Most application fees are going to be non-refundable because they're used for the criminal background check and the credit. They're going to pull a credit report more than likely, especially if you're working with a property management company. A lot of private landlords will have application fees because they're going to run a criminal background check and a credit report. They might have you do your own credit check. They might have you check your credit report somewhere and give them a copy, but most of them are going to do, if they have application fees, it's going to be for a criminal background check and or that credit report check. So, leasing requirements, we sort of touched on this. So, if you're looking at some units, there may be age restrictions. There are certain places in Charlottesville that you have to be like 62 years old or older. You also may not be allowed to have children under 18 years old. Those are very specific communities that have been planned that way, but there also may be, I know there are some units that you are either 62 years or older, or you have a disability or permanently disabled. Income restrictions may apply for certain units. Again, a lot of this is going to be for property managers and not private landlords. But maybe a private landlord has income restrictions, like we said earlier. They may require that you have 3 times the rent as your monthly gross income, so what you make before taxes. Some places are going to be market rent, so it's a certain amount every month, either set by the state or set by that landlord. But then you may also get lucky and get into a place where you only pay 31% of your gross income, and that means that the rental unit that you are renting has a Section 8 voucher attached to the unit. It won't, the Section 8 voucher won't travel with you, but it's attached to that apartment that you might be renting. So there are other things called housing choice vouchers. That's the type of Section 8 voucher that you take with you and go from place to place. But again, a lot of these have restrictions on based on background checks. So if there's any felonies, any drug-related use, violence, you may not be eligible to receive a housing choice voucher or to rent where there's a Section 8 voucher in that rental unit where you get to pay the 31% of your gross income, and then the federal government pays the rest. So depending upon your situation, you may or may not be eligible for the housing choice voucher or the Section 8 voucher that's attached to a specific rental unit. Okay. So the lease, so we're going to talk about the lease, the actual document. It's the most important part of the housing search. You want to make sure you read it over every section, ask questions if you don't understand a section. You know, private landlords have quirky things that they can throw in there, like, you know, you're not allowed to do lawn maintenance, they have to hire someone. Or they may say in the lease that you have to do the lawn maintenance and you're allowed to hire out if you want. So make sure there are no blank spaces when you sign that lease, and ask any questions. Once you sign, it's yours, and you have to follow the rules that are set out in that lease. Excuse me. You definitely want to make sure you know when the rent is due every month, and what the late fees and when do you have to pay the late fees. Sometimes it's, if you're 10 days late, then there's a $10 late fee, or if you're 15 late, it's a $15 late fee. So every lease is going to have that information, but it's going to be different from lease to lease. Okay. So these are the things you should check when you're moving into the unit. So you want to check the outside of the rental unit, inside the rental unit. You want to check the windows, all of the windows, the kitchen, all of the bathrooms, the electrical, I guess that's going to be the outlets, and the doors. So basically, when you move in, you want to do an inspection of all these different things. So you want to make a list of everything that you know is wrong with the rental unit. Take lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of pictures. Hopefully that picture can have like a date stamp so that you can prove later on that, oh yeah, the drywall or the wallpaper was peeling when I moved in. And once you have a list of all the things that are wrong and you have the pictures, you can give the list to the landlord within 2 to 5 days after moving in, so that the landlord is aware, so that they know that the wallpaper was peeling the day that you moved in. So when you move out, they can't come to you and say, hey, that wallpaper was not peeling, so you have to pay out of your security deposit to replace the wallpaper. Well, then you can whip out your pictures and your list that you gave them and said, hey, no. I took a picture, I told you that the wallpaper was peeling, and you can't charge that to me. You know, you can't take part of my security deposit to pay for this because it was here when I moved in. So when you do move out from your lease, you want to schedule an appointment and walk through with the landlord so that you can agree on the condition of the property. You know, lots of landlords will hire someone to come in and do cleaning, and let's say, you know, someone was cleaning the carpet and they accidentally knocked over their equipment and put a ding in the drywall. Well, the landlord can't take your security deposit and pay for that ding in the drywall if it happened after you moved out and after you both agreed on the condition of the property. So take lots of pictures when you move in, when you move out, after everything's out, so that you can prove that you left it in the condition that you and the landlord agreed on. Alright, so we are moving on to fair housing portion of the presentation. So what we're going to talk about, what is the fair housing law, who's protected, what does it cover, and look at some discriminatory housing practices. Okay, so the fair housing law, it's a federal law, and the state of Virginia upholds this law. They also added an additional protected class, but basically it says that you can't be discriminated against when you're buying or renting a house based on the following 8 items. This also applies to advertising as well. It's not just when you rent or when you go to buy a house, it applies to the advertising materials that the landlords or the lenders are using when they're reaching out to potential buyers or potential tenants. So you cannot be denied housing or treated differently when you're buying or renting based on your race, based on the color of your skin, based on the religion that you adhere to, that you practice. You can't be denied housing or treated differently because of your national origin. So just because you might have been born in South America doesn't mean that you can be denied housing solely because you were born in South America, because of your national origin. You can't be denied housing because you are a woman or a man. You can't be denied housing because you have a disability, either physical or mental. And you can't be denied housing because you have kids that are under 18 years old who might, quote unquote, mess up the place, right? Or might be loud. Just because you have kids does not mean that you can be denied housing or treated differently when you're trying to rent a place. Okay. Now, the state of Virginia has added elderliness as a protected class. So that's not a federal thing. It's just a state of Virginia thing. So you can't be denied housing because you're 55 years or older. So I think this sort of applies more to mortgages. So some people are like, okay, if you're 55 or let's say you're 60 years old and you get a 30-year mortgage, the lender can't say, dude, you're going to die, your life expectancy is 70 years, so who's going to pay me back the rest of this money? They can't deny you renting a house or buying a house just because of your age. Or because of your elderliness, because you're 55 years or older. Okay. So examples of discriminatory housing practices. So if you give them a call, if you give a landlord a call or property management team a call, they can't refuse to rent, sell, or show you the property, again, based on the color of your skin or even how you talk, right? So if you have a deep Southern accent or if you have a Chicano accent or, if they can tell by, the tone of your voice or the words that you use, and make assumptions on where you grew up or where you're from. They can't just say, oh, that house has been sold or that house has been rented out, but it really hasn't. They're not allowed to do that. Again, they have to tell you the truth about what's available and what's not. They can't steer you and say, oh, this house is much better for you because it's in a certain area or in a certain neighborhood or it's whatever it is. You get to choose where you live as long as you meet the terms, income, credit, landlord references, criminal background check is okay. Like, if you meet those things, then they can't tell you you can't rent a certain place or you have to rent in another place or in another part of town. Again, they have to keep the same terms, conditions, and privileges and services for everyone. If they deviate, if they go and change their conditions just because of the color of your skin or the religion that you practice, then that is that's a violation of the fair housing laws. They can't discriminate in their advertising or any statements that they make. So, for example, we got a report actually last week that someone in Earlysville had a sign up that said they were advertising for a unit, and on it said no blacks or Mexicans are allowed to apply. So that is a discriminatory statement, and we've contacted the landlord, but they're not allowed to do that. Okay. So, let's see. Examples of discriminatory housing practices. Again, they can't have different terms or conditions for buying a house, for the home loan, or any insurances. They're not allowed to threaten or coerce people. And then they can't make landlords and property management companies, like if they refuse to make reasonable accommodations or reasonable modifications to the property due to a disability or physical condition, they're not allowed to do that either. So some issues that come up for families with kids and women. So the number of people that are allowed in a unit has to be reasonable. So it's the general rule is at least 2 people per bedroom. So if you have a family size of 6, then a 3-bedroom house is plenty big enough for you, right? So 2 people per bedroom. It doesn't matter if the kids are boys or girls. So if you have a boy and a girl sharing the same bedroom, they can't say they can't rent to you because you don't have an even number of boys and girls that can go into the 2 different bedrooms. A boy and a girl can stay in the same bedroom, and it's none of the property manager's business. The property management company and private landlords cannot charge you more rent for more people. So if you have 6 people that are living in that 3-bedroom house, they can't charge you, $50 or $75 extra for, after the 5th person. The rent is for the unit. Doesn't matter how many people are living there, as long as it's reasonable and does not violate, the zoning laws, and it doesn't violate any of the fire marshal regulations. Excuse me. Rules for renting shouldn't discriminate against kids or be enforced more strictly against kids. So, for example, common areas like out on the lawn. So the landlord can't say, "Oh, your kids can't play out on the lawn," just because they're kids. It is common areas, and they can't restrict your children unless they're doing something wrong or against the rules to the common areas. So if they are, just playing with a ball and being kids, then that's fine. But if they're doing something against the rules, then that would be a different story. Sexual harassment in housing is illegal no matter what it is. And then victims of domestic violence are protected. Or try to be protected. So the other category that I do want to talk about today is fair housing issues for people with disabilities. So reasonable accommodations, so any change in the rule or policy, the property managers, as long as it's reasonable, then they have to make it. So service animals, for example, if you have a condition and a service animal is recommended by your physician, then, and if the property management company has a no pet policy, a service animal is not a pet. They have a job to do in relation to your health, and that is a reasonable change in the rules or the policies for someone with a disability. If there are any physical limitations and you need a reserved accessible parking space, that is a completely reasonable change in rules, that they can reserve a parking space for you. Some people may need live-in aids, and that may be considered a violation of your lease. But again, a person with a disability, this is not a huge change in policy or rules for property management, and they should be able to make that accommodation for you. And then if someone needs a monthly rent reminder, again, that's a reasonable request, and property management should be able to make that change in policy for you. Okay, so if you feel like you have been discriminated against in housing, where do you go? How do you report the housing discrimination? So for Piedmont Housing Alliance, you can come to us. We do advocacy for our clients, and you would fill out an intake form. We would help you file a complaint to either the Virginia Fair Housing Office or the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So if you have a verbal complaint, if you have a complaint outside of the court system, then you can file that complaint with after, if you had an incident today, you have a year from now in order to file that complaint. So you don't have to do it immediately, but it would expire after a year. We generally tell people to use to submit the complaint to the Virginia Fair Housing Office, because if you went to HUD first, they would just refer the complaint to the Virginia Fair Housing Office. It would just take a bunch of time. So we would just help you fill out a complaint form and then send it over to the Virginia Fair Housing Office. And then if you wanted to involve attorneys, so do a complaint through the civil court, then you have within 2 years from the incident to report that. And any landlord-tenant issues, so the landlord's not giving you the security deposit back, they're not doing any repairs, they won't exterminate the bed bugs that are there or exterminate any of the other bugs, then we can walk you through your options here at Piedmont Housing Alliance. So we do intake form and education and help you form a letter to your landlord with some of those issues. And then there's the Virginia Office of Consumer Affairs and the contact information there. Legal Aid used to do a lot of landlord-tenant issues, but they don't have the staff resources any longer. And if you were to go to Legal Aid with a landlord-tenant issue, it would need to be like a class action lawsuit, so more than one person had the same problem with that same landlord. Okay, so if someone wanted resources for working on credit, you can come to Piedmont Housing Alliance, and the housing counseling team can work with people on establishing credit or rebuilding credit. That is our contact information. And if you have any questions, we would love to take them and maybe do a follow-up webinar or try to answer those questions and get the information back to Campbell. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope this was filled with great information and really good resources for you ladies. All right, have a good day. Bye.